to Monroe's community event, community discussion and book talk with our brother, the author, student in the ministry of Young Principal Sparkon, Demetric Muhammad. Before we get started, we're going to have a couple community workers have some words with us. We have our brother. He's actually a school board member in the city of Syracuse, New York. And he's also a professor at Syracuse University. He's an educator. He's our friend and brother. Please receive student in the ministry, Mark Muhammad.
In the name of Allah, the beneficent, the merciful, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. I recognize that Muhammad is indeed his messenger. Thank you, Brother Jason, for the opportunity, the principal Muhammad, for the opportunity to come today. Where I am a minister, Mark Muhammad, student minister in Syracuse, New York. Also, as Brother said, I'm an educator at Ondar Community, former professor at Ondar Community College and adjunct professor at Syracuse University. It is an honor to be here today, and I bring greetings from the brothers and sisters in Syracuse, New York. Assalamu alaikum. And from our school board, even though I'm not here as the official capacity of my school board, I know that whenever we get together at Rochester, Syracuse, we are a brotherhood and sisterhood of these brothers and sisters on the school board that we get a chance to see each other. So I'm very happy to be here. Especially happy to be here with Brother Demetric. A brother that's a scholar, he is an educator in his own right, tremendous amount of work on behalf of the Nation of Islam and forming people. So glad that Brother Demetric is here and honored to be here with him. Let me just say something quickly about education, just as an educator. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's book, A Torchlight for America, written in 1992, chapter 4 is entitled Fixing the Public School System. And in that chapter, he talks about all the problems that exist in America dealing with education. But he doesn't just dwell on the problems, he also gives a solution. And one of the things he said, the problem that is going on with education is that the root motivation for education is the acquisition of material wealth and things. He said that's not what education is really about. Education is about utilizing, helping students to find the gifts and talents that God has deposited in them that they can then give to the world, the cultivation of that gift and talent. And so we know from what happens in the public school system that that's not happening. What's happening is we're testing children, we're giving them information, and we're asking them to regurgitate. We're taking the information, we as a professor or as a teacher, taking our information, and then we're chosen as an empty vessel, and we're taking ourselves and pouring ourselves into them, our information into them. And at the end of that, we want to test them to see how well they've learned and taken in the information that we've given them. We're not looking to cultivate the gifts and talents that God has deposited in them. At the end of the year, what gives them the A, B, C, D, preferably the A, is that they have become a mini-me. All right? And if you don't become a mini-them, then you fail. Well, the Minister Farrakhan said that's not the way we should do it. We should cultivate, we should find out, get to know the child, find out what their talent is, and help to develop them so that they can make their contribution to the world. The students that are trying to do that end up on the streets because they can't submit to them. And so they end up leaving. And we have to go and get them, Principal Muhammad. In the Syracuse City School District, if they go, they go. But we have to go out and get them and bring them back and help to develop them and make them who God wants them to be. So the Muhammad University of Islam is an opportunity for us to cultivate the children. We are a successful model. But the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said, we can develop our own children. But we stop there and don't reach out to the children in the public school system that we're dealing with, our children will just be out there and they will be overtaken by the children that we don't know. So it's important for us to be involved and engaged, and that's why I'm on the school board, trying to help change education, make a contribution, helping them to see and to know what it is that we see and we know. And we need to do that here at Rochester as well. And those that Brother Minister Kenneth was at the conference hall will also share some information. But I thank you, brothers and sisters. I thank y'all, Minister Louis Farrakhan. I thank Brother Principal Muhammad for allowing me to come and give you the greeting. So I'm late.
Next, we're going to hear from the local representative, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. He also works in the school district with children. It's something because we've talked to so many children and taught so many children over the years that sometimes we'll be out and the horn beeps. They say, Muhammad! Like 3 brothers just throw their hand up because we don't know who they're talking to. If they got me in high school, they might have gotten the brother in elementary school. So let's hear from Student Minister Kenneth Muhammad.
In the name of Allah, the beneficent and merciful, we thank Almighty God, Allah, for His grace, for His mercy. We thank Him for coming and raising from among us a messenger, a man who only went up to, I believe, the 4th grade, but a man who had a thirst for knowledge, and that is the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He is the principal man of why the Nation of Islam exists today. But we thank him for preparing and teaching so many of his students. But there was one student who stood out from among the rest. Not that he was thinking that he was better than the rest, but he gave a better effort to show his demonstration, his gratefulness for the divine wisdom that he was being taught to by his teacher. And that is the man that we attempt to represent, rather in Syracuse or Utica or Rochester or any city in America. I'm speaking of my teacher, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Once again, thank you, brothers and sisters. Let's give a hand to our Utica family, a hand to our Syracuse family, a hand to our Rochester, and let's give a hand to Brother Principal Jason Muhammad and the staff who has done and demonstrated to us a wonderful example of what it means to be a student. Is that right? As Brother Mark said, if I'm putting stuff in you, you're really not a student. A teacher is designed to bring out of the individual or the human being what God put in us and to put that to service so that we can be of some use to ourselves, to our family, to our nation, and to the world. So we thank Almighty God, Allah, for giving to us the creative mind and the will for us to use our creative mind and our creative expression. So today is day 2 of the creative expression of research, the creative expression of knowledge. So I want to thank each and every one of us for taking the challenge, because it's a great subject that needs to be told. Are y'all, everybody all right? I'm just checking now. You know, I know Sunday is tomorrow, but Brother Demetric will be our guest speaker tomorrow. But brothers and sisters, honestly, we want to thank the staff who came to the principal, who came to Brother Jason and said, we want to bring Brother Demetric back to the school so that our students can have the opportunity to ask questions based on the research that Brother Demetric had. He has written so many books, and they, from what I was told, read the book. Is that misinformation? Thank you. See, the principal, she said, no, that's not misinformation. They read the book, and from reading the book, they raised questions to our brother. And yesterday, we saw a demonstration of students interacting with an author, students interacting with a researcher. And I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, you should have been what I was able to witness. I was able to witness young people coming alive. See, they talk about what our youth are not doing, but we need to give a reflection and a report of what we witnessed yesterday. We witnessed students who had a hunger for the truth, students who had a thirst for the knowledge, and more importantly, they were not told what to say. They came together in groups and took on various projects, and they put their questions to the researcher, and I believe he passed the test. So today is day 2 for the community now, because we have to have this discussion based on the facts, not based on what you've been told, because a lot of us have been told some stuff. Hello, somebody. I've been told some stuff, but we want to know what is the truth. So what better person to bring back to Rochester than our brother who has put in the work to prove his love for God, prove his love for the truth, because that is more important than anything else in the world. And we want to know the truth because we have been deprived of the truth from the highest office of this country all the way down to the major cities in America. Talk to me. Have we been deprived of the truth? That has caused family members to fall out with one another. But we are one family, and today we will get that truth. So I'm thankful to my brother and for his staff for putting this together. And I'm here to support the school and support the staff and to support the students, as I am a student of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Thank you for coming. May God continue to reward each and every one of us. Let us bring back our brother Jason.
So we are ready to hear from Brother Minister Demetric Muhammad. You know, the story is true that Brother Minister Kenneth was telling. So Ms. Garber, raise your hand, Ms. Garber. I'm not going to make you stand and embarrass yourself. Ms. Garber, give Ms. Garber a round of applause. Ms. Garber came to us January, end of January, beginning of February. So Brother Demetric came last year in May. He was invited by some of the brothers and sisters in Rochester, community activists, who were interested in bringing him in to commemorate the birth anniversary of our brother Malcolm X. And so during that weekend, Brother Demetric was here. He presented downtown, and we brought him to the school because whenever he's around, we get the opportunity to talk to young people. He wants to have the opportunity to talk to young people. So the engagement of the students was not as great because they were a little bit shocked to be hit with so much information. They weren't really sure how to react to it. The other part of that is, this was an author, this was a researcher who looked like them, who had gone through the steps necessary to ascertain the truth. And so, as Ms. Garber was working with another teacher, Ms. Carey, to put together a project, you know, February 21st is the date that Brother Malcolm was assassinated. So she came and said, listen, we're doing this project. She said, do you think we could get Minister Muhammad to come back? I was like, who? She was like, Demetric. I was like, want me to call him? She was like, yeah. And she didn't realize I was like going to call him right there while I was sitting with her. So we called, and he said, sure. So we worked it out, but it's because she wanted the students to have the opportunity to actually engage with a researcher in a real way. So we went in when they were preparing, and I just thought it was going to be, you know, a class of 30 students and maybe had the book. There was 150 students on the list. And how many actually participated? Was it 75? Actually in there, they're broken up into teams. They got books, they got articles, an article as recent as the article from February speaking about how the family of Brother Malcolm is now suing the NYPD and the FBI and others. She's got modern, current information. And she had Brother Demetric's book. But didn't you kill Malcolm? So now I'm like, okay, this is a different kind of response that we're going to get from the students. They broke into teams. They had to come up with questions. They decided, nope, some of these are yes/no questions. We're not doing that. That doesn't go deep enough. And then they had spokespersons who would present the questions. What actually happened, though, was different. Because when they came together and started getting sparked and encouraged, students that I wasn't expecting to ask questions were like politicking to get the questions. Miss, can I ask a question? Can I? Then some asked questions just because they were there and they wanted to know. So Miss Garber afterwards said, I don't know that it could have gone any better. So it was a wonderful opportunity to see what happens when young people become invested in their own learning. All that our brother, Student Minister Mark, shared is not about what we can put in, but about what we can extract and pull out. And that's what I saw from the students yesterday. They were tapped in such a way that that which they had inside that was wonderful and beautiful, that maybe we didn't know was there, maybe they didn't know was there. Right. The opportunity was presented for them to actually pour out what the God had already put in. So we're going to get ready to receive our brother. You know, the thing that I really appreciate about Student Minister Demetric Muhammad is he is a student in the truest sense of the word. Come on. And he doesn't just find that first response, but he goes deeper and gets to the root of information. And he is, as he shared with us yesterday, like a detective, where he uncovers one piece. Well, wait, let me find another piece. Well, wait. See, because if there was one, there must be two. And maybe that'll lead to three. And he continuously digs and he verifies. You know, they say trust and believe. He verifies that which he finds because he doesn't want to share misinformation. In fact, you could be charged. If you're going to share the lie, that's just as bad as the one who started the lie. Right. So he continues to dig and then shares the information. And I told him in regards to the question of Malcolm X, I said, brother, the beautiful thing to me about this book, when you read it, you don't come away with, oh, he's just saying that because he's in the nation. Right. This stands true in spite of the fact that he's in the nation. His personal beliefs are irrelevant to the actual facts that are contained in the book. It's just nice that we, for once, get to tell our own story. It's terrible when the plumber starts telling the electrician what's wrong with the fuse box. Right. And so for once, we get to tell our own side of the story. And he is a wonderful person to share that with the people because he has the receipts. So at this time, I'm going to get ready. If our brother is ready, you know, I love to learn. I love being a student. So I'm excited to hear from our brother. And he is here. Let us receive him with a round of applause. Student Minister Demetric Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum. In the most holy name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness to the oneness of God, who is the revealer of all truth and the sender of all prophets. We thank him for his mercy. We thank him for his grace. We thank him for all that he has blessed us with. And if I live to be 1,000 years old, or if I'm only blessed to see one more day, I could never thank him enough for my teacher, the Honorable Minister Farrakhan, and his teacher, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Beloved brothers and sisters and friends, I am so happy to be here once again in the city of Rochester. Always have a wonderful time whenever I'm in this central New York area, and I have shared with the brothers over the my occasions coming here that I always feel such a peaceful spirit whenever I'm in this part of the country. And one of these days, I think I'll have to do some ancestral work to maybe see if I have family that was in this part of the country, because I really am always happy and at rest and at peace whenever I'm here, whether it's Rochester or Syracuse or Utica. It's just a wonderful part of the country to be in. And this weekend, as has been said, has been particularly special for me because of the Monroe High School and Ms. Garber and Principal Muhammad inviting us to come back and to share with the students. As a student of Minister Farrakhan, I take on the priorities and the leanings of my teacher. And the minister is always very excited. He's taught us to be very excited to share with the youth. I don't think I have to stress the fact that we all bear witness that our young people are under the weight of so many different influences in a world like this. And most of the time, those influences are not positive. Most of the time, those influences go right back to the overwhelming and overspreading influence of popular culture, which increasingly, as the days go by, appears to be more and more toxic, more and more in promotion of self-destructive lifestyles, and void of morality and virtue that any of us would like to see young people possess. So this has been a very exciting opportunity for me, and I thank those that have been a part of it, and I appreciate the opportunity. Brother Jason, Principal Muhammad said, you know, we want to do a book talk. And so what I would like to do is to just share a few slides from our presentation that we developed actually long before the book came out. One of the students had a wonderful question yesterday who asked about, you know, why did we do this book called But Didn't Y'all Kill Malcolm? Whatever the draft title, but they said most people are not from the South, so they don't know what y'all is, so you gotta say, but didn't you kill Malcolm? But I live in the South. And so they asked me the question is, hey, didn't y'all kill Malcolm? And so we would always get that question. I don't care where we were presenting or what topic we were asked to present on, invariably that question would always come from some person in the audience. And most of the time we could tell that it was from a young person. And so as we began to respond to it and research it, it was a later development that said, well, you probably need to put the research in book form. So I'm going to show a little bit of the research. Do we have the cord to plug in, Mr. Kenneth? Yes. Is this it here? That's it. We're going to share some of the research and then give those who have blessed us with their presence an opportunity to ask us some questions. Right. I enjoy questions. There is something I think amazing about the Socratic method that really helps us to go into the knowledge that we have. And one of our great pioneers in the Nation of Islam, may Allah be pleased with him, he's passed on, Minister Abdul Rahman Muhammad. He said once upon a time, he said, you know, I don't know what I know until y'all start asking me questions. So there's something powerful about the Socratic method that the question can cause the one that's being asked that question to have access to what knowledge and wisdom they have previously stored in their own consciousness. So I appreciate questions. Is the monitor on?
We good.
Is it coming on? So ultimately, the book became something of a mirror of the presentation. what we recognized was that the question that we were being asked was a part of a popular mythology that we could identify was composed of certain component parts. Again, the influence not just of young people, but of the American people in totality is by and large controlled by popular culture. When we say popular culture, we're talking about movies and television and magazine and today the internet, music even. And what that means is that those who have the power to create and distribute popular culture are many times in the modern context more powerful than parents, more powerful than preachers and teachers, more powerful than politicians even. Right. So this kind of subject, the life, the work, the history, and particularly the small piece that we address, which is the assassination of Minister Malcolm X, is not immune from having been molded and shaped and fashioned after popular culture. Fact about it, as we talked about yesterday, Brother Minister Malcolm did not enjoy wide and public appeal during his lifetime, not from mainstream sources. So much so that at his untimely passing, being assassinated, he was mocked and ridiculed and scourged throughout most of the mainstream periodicals like the New York Times, the papers in Boston and Chicago and Los Angeles. All of the public obituaries of Minister Malcolm denigrated him. So it's peculiar then that maybe 20 and 30 years later, Brother Minister Malcolm re-emerges before the watchful eyes of a younger generation, and he has a sanitized version of himself introduced to the public. And when we examine that, we have to ask the question, if the powers that be hated Malcolm in life, how do they fall in love with him after he's dead? Right. Is this a case of necrophilia, the love of the dead? Wow. The veneration of the deceased? Right. It's curious that most of our leaders are opposed and hated in life, while they're alive and they're growing, evolving, and they have an ability to give an instruction or to make a call to action. They are vilified while they are alive. Right. But when they're dead, they are celebrated. One of these days you'll get Are you plugged in there? Yeah, we good. He's in one? Yes, sir. Try another input. On your remote, can you try maybe HDMI 2? Just to select a different input. Yeah, well, it's already, I'm connected. It's just, you see, I have HDMI, no signal HDMI 1. Do you have a HDMI 2 or HDMI 3? Normally you can access it through your remote.
I'm plugged and plug it back in with a Zoom.
Pardon?
I'm plugged and plug it back in.
Did it recognize?
But while we work on the technical glitches here, brothers and sisters, we won't continue. But that was one of the things that we noticed. We noticed the curious reintroduction of a revolutionary black leader by forces and sources that hated him while he was alive. And that was strange for us because we know that the powers that be not just gonna do that. There has to be some motive. There has to be some agenda associated with it. And one of the things that we noticed was that the curious, sanitized reintroduction of Minister Malcolm coincided with a time when the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was gaining momentum in rebuilding the work of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. The Nation of Islam in 1975, the departure of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, it underwent dramatic changes. And the net result was that you had a religious community seeking to adhere to and practice the tenets of the faith of Sunni Orthodoxy. But the call for an independent nation, the call for justice for the descendants of slaves in America, the call for reparations, the mantra of do for self, right, all of the elements of so-called black nationalism no longer were present. Right. So the nation, for all intents and purposes, was something of a toothless tiger. And so in the book, you can see where we document that Malcolm's reintroduction was strategic. Because as Minister Malcolm was being reintroduced, there was a new narrative attached to Minister Malcolm. And that new narrative was that his assassination was not just a result of black Muslims, but now specificity was added to it. His assassination was the result of Louis Farrakhan. Now this is strange because that was not a part of the narrative for nearly 30 years. Right. And what was being seized upon was a series of writings and articles that Minister Farrakhan had published in Muhammad Speaks newspaper, where he was doing what Malcolm had modeled before him to do and instructed all of the followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to do, which was to defend their leader and teacher. Right. And even though the minister's writings were a part of many different writings from various followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, up to and including Minister Malcolm's own biological brothers, it was Minister Farrakhan's words that were singled out, such that young people would fall in love with Minister Malcolm, who's deceased, but develop a hatred for Minister Farrakhan, who's alive. And so the powers that be begin to work this, and I have to give them a lot of credit. It's been very effective. As I mentioned it dogs the trail of any of us who are his students and ministers everywhere we go. Right. That's right. The Malcolm question emerging. Right. So the component parts that we sought to break down and respond to include, number one, Spike Lee's movie. Right. And of course, the autobiography of Malcolm X. We also address the magnum opus, if you will, of Professor Manning Marable, Malcolm X, a life of reinvention. And, you know, again, these are elements of the mythology that have created in the minds of so many people that it was Elijah Muhammad Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. And as we begin to go down that road and looking at research, we began to see that the question, but didn't y'all kill Malcolm, was really a part of the campaign to inspire people to do harm, if not to kill Minister Farrakhan.
Right.
Because once you fill black youth with love for Minister Malcolm, and then you tell them it was Minister Farrakhan that caused his death, then the hope was that someone loyal to Minister Malcolm, wanting to avenge Minister Malcolm's death and assassination, would rise and try to harm Minister Farrakhan. It got so bad, brothers and sisters, that in the early 1990s, there was a controversy and a news story that came out where the daughter of Malcolm X had been arrested for plotting the assassination of Minister Farrakhan. And I told the students yesterday, and I always reflect upon this whenever I tell this story, you know, the minister is a very deeply spiritual man. And he's worthy for any person who's a spiritual person, because nowadays, you know, a lot of people don't self-identify as religious. Many people just self-identify as spiritual. And I would say that you would find a great example in Minister Farrakhan, because the minister, when he was told, now you put yourself in this situation, the FBI knocks on your door one day, and they say, Sister Andrina, we want you to know that we have just arrested some people that we found out were plotting to assassinate you. Don't worry nothing about it. We got the bad guys. And they said, Brother Cedric, there have been people planning your death. But don't worry about it. We've arrested them.
Right.
I can't speak for you, but I can speak for myself. I would breathe a sigh of relief. I would be happy.
Right.
I certainly, whatever my reaction would be in reality, I don't think that I would then have the thought not to believe law enforcement and come to the aid of those that they had arrested who were planning to take my life.
Right.
So that unlikely scenario did in fact happen in the case of when Minister Farrakhan was notified that Malcolm X's daughter, Kubila Shabazz, had been arrested for plotting to assassinate him. Not only did the minister not believe law enforcement, but he literally came to the aid of Minister Malcolm's daughter. And in that which it was subsequently called political genius, the minister held a unification rally at the Apollo Theater in New York City, in Harlem, New York. But what I didn't know back in 1995 when it took place, that it had actually been the idea of Minister Farrakhan to hold a fundraiser for Malcolm's daughter, again, who had been arrested for plotting his assassination. And so I believe it was Rickford who did an autobiography of Betty Shabazz. He talked about that event raised over $250,000 for Kubila Shabazz and her son and their legal expenses. And I say it was called political genius by the press at that time, to which Minister Farrakhan, in a moment of righteous indignation, said, don't call this political genius. See, the press was calling it political genius as really an acknowledgement that the minister had been put he had been marginalized and to a certain degree isolated because this new propaganda campaign was blaming him for Minister Malcolm's assassination some 30 years prior. So the media understood Farrakhan's in a predicament. He's trying to rally black people, but the powers that be have created this false narrative that he killed Malcolm. But what they saw at the event at the Apollo was the minister coming out of, and we would see in the streets, the trick bag that he had been placed in due to this false narrative.
Right.
So they were calling it political genius because the political takedown, the public crucifixion in the media, they saw Minister Farrakhan outmaneuvering them. But listen at what the minister had to say, and the transcript of this is in the book. Because the day after the event at the Apollo, he went over to Muhammad Mosque number 7 in New York, and he spoke. And he said, a transcript of both of those messages is in this book. You should read it. The minister said, to call this political genius is to deny the quality of my heart.
Wow, right, man. Look at that.
He was saying the outcome of me avoiding what y'all tried to put me in was not because I have this great political mind. But he says that my love for our people, my love for Brother Malcolm's family, my love for the family of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and wanting to see the wound that Minister Malcolm's assassination created in Black America healed was my motivation.
Come on.
Not trying to outmaneuver the press.
Right.
Not trying to outmaneuver law enforcement and their strategy to destroy this movement called the Nation of Islam that he was rebuilding, even though law enforcement agencies did not want to see it rebuilt.
Right.
So that was the ultimate goal of the reintroduction of Minister Malcolm back into mainstream society. You probably have heard that very recently. There has been, you need to get back in. Okay. Yeah, told wrong. Yes, sir. So let me let you back in. Yes, sir.
If you know how to cast it, you might be able to cast.
Make sure your computer's on the same Wi-Fi network.
It shouldn't even be today at all. It's identifies it. Set this back there, Jason. So you can come over if you can't really go ahead. So that's the reintroduction. And one of the things that you will also find as a component part of the book is our response to the inaccuracies of both the movie and the book. The movie yesterday was of great interest to the students. And, you know, to be quite honest about it, I'm a fan of the movie. It's a wonderful movie. You got to give credit where credit is due. Denzel did a wonderful job.
Yes.
Angela Bassett did a wonderful job. Spike did a wonderful job. But it stands alone as a work of art in entertainment.
Right.
And again, popular culture is so powerful that movies will always be more impactful than books. And I say that as a writer of books. I don't have any qualms about admitting the truth. But all throughout the movie, you see these different changes and edits. And one of the things that we discovered was that Spike Lee, when being interviewed by Professor Henry Louis Gates, he admits that he has to make all of these very substantive changes. So if you watch the movie, you know, we said, man, Brother Baines, you know, he was dead in prison and he brought Malcolm the truth, and Malcolm's eyes came open, and, you know, he was off to the races after that. But of course, any of you that have ever read even Malcolm's autobiography, you know that's not how Malcolm learned of the Nation of Islam.
Right.
He had siblings, blood brothers and sisters. They had become followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad before him, and his brother Reginald was the main one who introduced him to the teachings.
Right.
But because cost-saving measures, Warner Brothers only gave Spike $18 million. I think it cost over 30 to produce it. He had to kind of cut corners. And unfortunately, it reduced a movie from being, you know, a real historical, you know, drama to being historical fiction in many ways. Because if Malcolm's ascendancy to greatness is sparked from his introduction to the message of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, to substitute who brought him that message,
Come on.
I mean, it's like, you know, saying that Paul on the road to Damascus really had never been a persecutor of Christians.
Right.
He didn't have no vision of Jesus on that road to Damascus.
Right.
He just one day was reading a dictionary and he thought, you know what, I think I'm gonna follow Jesus.
Come on.
Because y'all know Noah Webster, you know, most people believe it was Noah Webster that made Malcolm
Right.
so formidable, a debater and an orator.
Right.
I mean, this is a man who only went to the 8th grade in school. He comes out, he's able to go and debate professors, Ivy League scholars,
Right.
and win.
Right.
Because he read Aardvark,
Come on.
Ant,
Right.
Black, dull, and sullen, lifeless.
Come on.
Now, don't get it twisted. One of the best friends you can have is the dictionary. I do a lot of work in jails and prisons with our incarcerated brothers and sisters. And I always encourage them, brother, get you a good unabridged dictionary.
Yes, sir.
The big kind that they have on the podium by itself
Right.
in the library. Get you that kind. Don't get the abridged version. That's okay if that's all you can get. But get you a good unabridged dictionary. Because words matter.
Go ahead.
But Malcolm was motivated to read the dictionary so that he might better understand what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was teaching him.
Right. Go ahead. Right. Go ahead.
It became a companion and supplemental to what he was learning from Mr. Muhammad. And you have to appreciate that while a prison inmate, Minister Malcolm was literally corresponding, writing letters back and forth to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was taking time to write him.
Right.
And you think about a man who has the broad duties and responsibilities of being in charge of a nationwide, international even movement.
Right.
making time out of his busy schedule to write a young brother who's writing him letters from prison. So we discussed this in the book. Ultimately, we are at a place now where I really believe that, and you have to forgive me because I'm a spiritual person, I believe that recent events and circumstances are converging to completely vindicate the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Minister Farrakhan, and the nation.
Right.
So Brother Minister Malcolm's family recently filed a lawsuit against certain entities and organizations. And there are some others that they've left out that I hope they get to at a certain point. You also see that NYPD undercover officer Ray Wood, which we discuss in our book, he left a deathbed confession.
Right. Come on.
Of his remorse
Right.
for having been a part of Minister Malcolm's assassination.
Right.
There were only 2 registered members of the Nation of Islam who were convicted for Minister Malcolm's assassination. And now their convictions have been overturned.
All right. Come on.
Right. So over and over again, you see that this mythology that has existed as a mainstay in Black urban legend, Muslims kill Malcolm. Right, come on. It's gradually evaporating right before our eyes. And I like to believe that some of what we have done have been a part of that, because we published this in 2020, just right before the pandemic. When the pandemic came, it dramatically interfered with our book tour. We were excited. We're going to Europe and a few other countries, because this is the first book, the first published response by the Nation of Islam in over 50 years.
Yes, sir.
And if you open the book, I think I have a picture that when I found this picture, it was very inspiring to me. And I kind of took it as something of a confirmation. But it was from March the 20th, 1970, Muhammad Speaks newspaper. It said, "Note to readers, last week, we promised to print a detailed account of the events which led to Malcolm X's suspension as a Muslim minister following his inflammatory statements about the late President Kennedy's assassination, statements which endanger not only Muslim brothers and sisters, but countless other Black people as well. But because of the length of the article and the great importance it has in these present days, we have decided to print it in a forthcoming pamphlet. We will notify our readers in advance of when the booklet's publication." Well, I could find nowhere where that ever materialized, Minister Mark.
Yes, sir.
But the intention was there
Right.
on the part of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the editors of Muhammad Speaks. So I said, well, maybe it was left for us to do it.
Yes, sir.
And so we soldiered on. Admittedly, this difficult, very difficult project. And so the book not only demystifies the movie and demystifies the book, but we also address those sensitive component parts of the mythology.
Great job.
The domestic life of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm's reaction to it. The myth that Malcolm goes to Mecca and he has his first encounter with white Muslims, and he realizes that Elijah Muhammad had deceived him. We attacked that mythology head on. Some of the students asked us about that yesterday. We deal with the problem of the assassination. And we go into an area where no scholar has gone before, where we talk about what did the role of Malcolm being accused of anti-Semitism play in his assassination? What role did the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith play in his assassination? We document how J. Edgar Hoover in the FBI had instructed all of his regional offices, all of his local offices, to establish a liaison relationship with the ADL, a private organization, but under Hoover's administration was part and parcel to COINTELPRO, the same ADL that dogs the trail of Minister Farrakhan in modern times with the false charge of being an anti-Semite. Malcolm was called an anti-Semite before Minister Farrakhan was called.
Right.
So we examine and bring pieces together for your consideration as to the role of that false charge in Minister Malcolm's assassination. And we also, before Ray Wood came out with his deathbed confession, we had published that Ray Wood's involvement in Minister Malcolm's assassination. So we're very happy to have been blessed to participate in this work that, from my vantage point, is very necessary, not just because I published it, but because I believe it's the beginning of our community beginning to address this controversy. We've been talked about, we've been slandered, libeled, right, accused, and since we don't really trust that the media will be our friend, we don't often go to the media with what we have to say. So I believe that this work is the beginning of more scholarship on the subject of Minister Malcolm's assassination and on his life and his importance. He is, after all, a student of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Right.
And so you have to, if you're a fair-minded person, you have to conclude that there is something more to this man, Elijah Muhammad, that he only went to 3 years of formal education. But he taught Malcolm, who went to the 8th grade in school. And based upon what Malcolm learned from Mr. Muhammad, Malcolm became the great Malcolm X. Right. Hopefully you will conclude that there's something about Mr. Muhammad because Minister Farrakhan went to 3 years of college.
Right. Come on.
And he tossed his 3 years of college to the side to sit at the foot of a man that only went to 3 years of formal education and became the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Cassius Clay was a great fighter. Right. But when he came to sit at the foot of Mr. Muhammad, he becomes an international hero and legend and an articulate spokesman for the poor and the oppressed. Yet this man's reputation, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, is frequently assassinated. And most of the time it has to do with him being falsely blamed for Minister Malcolm's assassination. In the book, we talk about why was Brother Malcolm poisoned in Egypt? Right. Question. We discussed why was Brother Malcolm not allowed to land in France. We go into Brother Malcolm and the dissension within his own ranks. Malcolm left the Nation of Islam and he established two organizations, Muslim Mosque Incorporated and Organization of Afro-American Unity. But the FBI has sent in informants and agent provocateurs, right, we define the important role of the agent provocateur. See, the informant, something of an innocuous character in many respects, because they are just carriers and distributors of information. They might come to a meeting like we're having today, and then they will go and report back what I said, how many people attended, what was the vibe, you see. But then there's another more pernicious character, the agent provocateur, that literally has the authority to do crimes while embedded in a particular organization that he has been assigned to infiltrate. Them kind of folks that stand up and say, get your hand out of my pocket.
Right.
And so under Hoover's administration, they were heavily utilized. Not only was Hoover and the FBI and the CIA and all of these alphabet organizations involved in the assassination of Minister Malcolm, but they went on to be a part of the assassination of Mark Clark and Fred Hampton,
Right.
the destruction of the Black Panther Party. And as we mentioned yesterday, it becomes increasingly important to realize that COINTELPRO is not the beginning of the U.S. government's efforts to sabotage the Black movement. Neither was it Hoover's beginning. J. Edgar Hoover began working to destroy Marcus Garvey in the early 20th century. Marcus Garvey, who had amassed millions of followers, the largest Black organization today, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, right? And by the time Minister Malcolm comes into the nation had already been targeted by government authority.
Right.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad and many of the early brothers were arrested in the early 1940s. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was accused of being a Japanese sympathizer during World War II because he was saying to his audiences, you should not sign up to fight on America's behalf in World War II to fight against the Japanese, and the Japanese ain't never did nothing to you and me. They were another group of people of color in some far-flung place that America had a problem with. But it wanted to use Black bodies in that war campaign to fight and die for freedom that we didn't enjoy in America. So for that reason, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and many of the early followers, his male followers, were in prison. This is before Malcolm, who doesn't really come into the nation until 1952.
Right.
Before COINTELPRO, J. Edgar Hoover operated something called the Security Index, rabble-rouser directory. And people like Ken O'Reilly and Jim Vanderwall and Ward Churchill, who have done a lot of work on COINTELPRO and the FBI, they document how that under the Security Index, now this is the height of the Cold War. Everything you hear is Russia is our mortal enemy. Kind of somewhat similar to today if you think about it. But it was during the time of the Security Index, the predecessor to COINTELPRO, that they had more members of the Nation of Islam listed than they did have members of the American Communist Party. So that's a startling revelation for America and its law enforcement apparatus to be more afraid of the so-called Black Muslims than they were communist Russia. So these are things that we document and talk about throughout the book. We were blessed, and you see on the back cover of the book, and this is a quote from Sarah Mitchell. I should have put a picture of me and Ms. Mitchell in the presentation. I've never shared it with anyone. But we were blessed to be with Sarah Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell was Minister Malcolm's secretary. And I'm always amazed that many of the Malcolm researchers, they don't talk a lot about her. They may mention her in passing, you know. And I learned that Miss Mitchell, many years ago, had written a monograph called Shepherd of the Black Sheep. And she had always maintained that the Nation of Islam did not kill him.
Right.
Now this is Malcolm's secretary with him the day before and the day of his assassination. Secretaries are important. Malcolm made a big deal of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's secretary. It was more strange that the Malcolm scholars don't talk a whole lot about Malcolm's secretary.
Right.
But it shows that most Malcolm scholars and researchers have already taken a side.
Right.
They are not as much objective. And I'm not upset about that. I mean, we all have biases.
Right.
It would be disingenuous for me to say to you that I don't have a bias that's pro Elijah Muhammad.
Right.
I ain't hiding that.
Right.
It'd be disingenuous for me to say I don't have a bias that's pro Louis Farrakhan. That would be disingenuous for me to try to make you believe that. But as a researcher and as a scholar, you have to put your bias to the side.
Right.
And be candid and honest enough to research and document what you find.
Right.
So why don't they talk to you about Sarah Mitchell? Well, it could be because, according to this quote, during his final hours, according to Ms. Mitchell, Malcolm spoke of plans for explaining to the general public how hasty and mistaken he had been in accusing Black Muslims of bombing his home. He said, "You won't find a single instance where Muslim men ever moved to attack women and children. I know their tactics and their limitations. And I'm telling you, things happening to me these past weeks go beyond the realm of the Muslim." Malcolm was convinced that a conspired maneuver was already in motion whereby if anything happened to him, Elijah and his organization would be blamed. But surprisingly enough, most people have never heard that.
That's right.
Again, secretaries are important. I don't think you need it, brother. We rolling off by Allah's grace.
Excellent job.
And so, again, secretaries are important. The English teachers might help us to see how the word is something of a compound word, giving a literal meaning to tarry or to labor with secrets.
Yes, sir. That's right.
Back in the day, if you were a salesperson and you wanted to get an account with a business, you had to make sure you establish a rapport with the decision maker secretary.
Right.
They'd always be sending secretaries flowers and candy and remembering their birthdays, a good salesman. Because you know a lot of people are trying to do business with their company, so you want to make sure that you're top of mind with the decision making secretary. So Ms. Mitchell's testimony we included in here because we think it's extraordinarily important. Not only was Malcolm planning that day, now think about it now, this is what he was planning to say the day he was assassinated.
That's right.
Which means that if they were listening to his phone calls, if they had bugged his private dwelling in his car, they knew what his plans were. So it's like a scenario where this plan that we have concocted, we got to press the go button. It's got to be done today. Moreover, here in the OAAU was planning to announce a plan for an economic takeover of Harlem. And this is where we get around with this whole idea of anti-Semitism because some of the Jewish periodicals in New York had written that Malcolm was responsible for certain violent acts that had taken place upon Jewish Christians. And prior to Harlem being this big black Mecca that we romanticize in black history, it was a Jewish ethnic enclave. And so by the time the 50s and 60s roll around, many of the Jewish laypersons are no longer living there, but the Jewish merchants remain. And Malcolm's idea was this: wherever we live, we should control it. Wherever we live, we should be in economic strength and power.
Right.
And the words of Malcolm, similar to the words of Minister Farrakhan today, in many respects, the black communities of America are like colonies. We have communities, but they're like colonies because most of the businesses and most of the institutions in our communities, we don't own, we don't control, we don't have say. So Malcolm in the OAAU was going to roll out this plan that it would have certainly angered the merchant class in Harlem. So Malcolm was about to make two very controversial declarations the day of his assassination. And so for more than 50 years, the nation has suffered. But the minister hasn't focused so much on the suffering of the little nation, but he's always been interested in how this has affected the larger community of black people in America. Because most people who love Malcolm feel that they have to take an antagonistic posture with respect to the Nation of Islam and its leadership.
Right.
And many of us in the nation, truth be told, you know, we have a hostile view of Brother Malcolm. That's just real.
That's right.
Not because Brother Malcolm was a saint. We love Malcolm as he was Malcolm X. The man that the world knows and loves is the man that was a student of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Exactly.
A spokesperson and representative for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Our issue comes legitimately with really June of 64 to February of 65.
Right.
This is the time when we see our brother, a hero and a champion he had been, a model and an exemplar he had been, totally do a 180 and become an adversary.
Right.
I stressed and I emphasized yesterday something that is not often emphasized, and I emphasize it again today. And that is, never lose sight that the Nation of Islam is on a spiritual foundation.
Right.
I don't care if you love us or you admire us or loathe us. Just understand that we do what we do, we are the way we are because of our spiritual understanding and our spiritual beliefs. And as people who believe that that man, the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, is Allah's messenger.
Yes, sir. Right.
Messiah, Christ. I mean, we see Elijah Muhammad like Christians see Jesus.
Teach, brother. Teach, brother.
So now you ask yourself a question. If you were in the company of Jesus and there was someone who became his adversary or opponent, what kind of posture would you take? So that's the posture we took. Because at that point, it ain't personal. It's really not. You know, it's not personal. You have become an aggressor against he whom my faith is in as God's instrument for my salvation and the salvation of humanity. But as we grow and we mature, we put it on a scale. Say, well, a man had a bad, a horrible, and egregious 8 months. Can you throw away the wonderful 12 years? So my motivation as a student minister for Archon was not just to vindicate the minister and the nation, but I wanted to demonstrate something that most people who deal with this subject don't care to demonstrate.
Listen.
And that is how to be someone that loves Malcolm and loves the Honorable Elijah Muhammad at the same time.
Right.
I think it's a false choice that has been imposed upon us. That you gotta either love one and hate the other, or love the other and hate the one. I think that's a false choice. I think that the perpetuation of that false choice serves the enemy of us all, which is Satan, who is always seeking to divide and through dividing conquer. Men and women of faith, men and women who want justice, men and women who are interested in changing the status quo. And this is not hyperbolic conspiracy theories that I'm spouting. This is well documented, brothers and sisters.
Yes, sir.
We documented in this book as something to be said for the fact that any time Black people in this country tried to organize so that we might be relieved of the burden of our suffering in this country, our greatest enemy was the government. It didn't come and help us and aid us, but it attacked our leadership. Lied on them, slandered them, destroyed them, and then destroyed their movement. It's like when the Bible says, smite the shepherd, scatter the flock. Where is Dr. King's movement today? Where is it? They trot our dear brother out every February. They remind us of him in '63. I have a dream. But where's his movement? You can hardly point to anything and say, this is the continuation of the legacy of Dr. King. A lot of people claim it. I'm not saying that there ain't people that claim it. Right. Because every Tom, Dick, and Harry is claiming, and this is in Dr. King's legacy. No, it's not. No, it's not. Because you don't hear enough of Dr. King after the dream.
Right.
He met with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in 1966.
Yes, sir. Think on that.
2 Georgia boys, sons of preachers, larger than life figures among their people, doing that which was improbable, coming together. Can you imagine?
Talk about that.
What kind of organizational and spiritual nuclear fusion that would have created?
Yes, sir.
There's a wonderful photo you can find on the internet. And it's of Dr. King, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, as another brother, and there's Coretta Scott King. And Dr. King and Honorable Elijah Muhammad are shaking hands. But what's amazing to me in the photo, because there are other photos of together, was the facial expression of Coretta Scott King.
Yes, brother.
I mean, she was overwhelmed with joy. A huge smile on her face.
Right.
And I can't claim to speak for our sister. I don't know what she was thinking. But I can have a healthy speculation that she may have felt that, you know, if my husband and Mr. Muhammad come together, my husband might have some worthy protection. Right? My husband might be in the company of people who don't just believe in turning the other cheek. Right? Because Dr. King was famous for talking about the death threats that he received at his home. Can you imagine? Your father, your husband, and your phone is ringing off the hook all day.
All day.
Death threats. Nigga, we gonna kill you. We're gonna blow up your house, kill your family. All day. What does that do to a wife? How insecure does that make her feel? She may believe in her husband and love the cause that he's trying to stand for. But I got these babies. Right. What we gonna do?
Yeah.
So I've always looked at that photo, you know, and just smiled because it shows that these two brothers were moving towards one another. And we are so in desperate need of that today. I say we don't have the luxury to continue to be disunited.
That's right.
Right? We can't continue to afford that luxury. But we include all of these component parts in this modest offering. So I would like to, if you have any questions, what kind of time do we have, Brother Jason? My phone is somewhere. Okay. Because if you have questions, I would be honored to do my best to respond to your question. I have to offer a disclaimer. I may not have an answer for your question, but as a researcher, if I don't have an answer for it, I can go and research it and send the answer back. So I'm going to put a pin in my opening remarks. And if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll do our best to respond. Yes, sir. You guys have to speak up. You're in the back, my brother, so we can hear you.
Wa
alaikum salam.
I'm the brother servant. I would like you, if it's possible, brother, you can sign the book that you have.
I would be honored to do so. We're going to probably be set right here at the end. Got some of our items will have the book also available, and I would be honored to do that. I appreciate your support. Yes, ma'am.
Assalamu sir.
Wa alaikum salam.
What surprised you the most about the research that you did for
To be very candid about it, the most surprising thing was to see how the false charge of anti-Semitism played a role in Malcolm's assassination. I wasn't expecting to find that. I wasn't expecting to find a celebration among Jewish journalists of Malcolm's assassination. One particular writer, and I posted this here because I knew people wouldn't believe it, but Samuel Schrade, he wrote in the Jewish Sentinel, he said, Malcolm was attended by two Jewish doctors. One of his assailants shot in the leg, was taken to a Jewish hospital. The fireman critically wounded trying to put out the blaze at the Muslim temple was a Jew. The manager of the ballroom where Malcolm was shot was Jewish. And the photographer who got the only picture of Malcolm being carried out on the stretcher was also Jewish. And Schrade had been on campus again. He had accused Malcolm of being everything from being an anti-Semite to being a unregistered agent of the Egyptian government, because at that time, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt, was very friendly to the Black nationalist movement in America. We mentioned to the students yesterday that Nasser was so enamored with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad that he offered to build him a palace. He wanted him to move to Egypt to just be free to teach without hindrance in Egypt. Of course, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, you know, my mission is in America, for my suffering people. So for Schrade to write of this, it is very suspicious, because he's saying Malcolm, this infamous Black anti-Semite, dies in Jewish custody. You know, So Shred's writing, along with some of the other things, was very eye-opening to me. Because again, many Malcolm researchers have not even looked in that direction. You know, and some things that are there for the asking if you would just look, you know, behind the curtain, you know, tug on a particular thread, you know, and see where it will lead you. And so where that led us was a lot of information, and some of it we did not include in the book, but may be a part of a future volume, just looking at that, because we see that being very relevant today, because the minister is called an anti-Semite. And we certainly are those who want to stand against and stand in the way of any attempt to assassinate the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Right. So seeing that was very eye-opening for me, as well as certain parts of my interview with Sarah Mitchell were very eye-opening to me. And I really had a great time being able to speak with her, you know, and, you know, she's a primary source. So hopefully at some point we can share more of what she shared with us. But we wanted to make sure that, you know, the parts of her monograph, you know, and it was, you know, like I said, one day we'll have to do a story about the book, Brother Courtney, because you know, there's a whole lot that went into getting this out. But when we were looking for Ms. Mitchell's monograph, this is just one story. We were looking for Ms. Mitchell's monograph. It was only at one library in the country. Mm-hmm. And it just goes again to show how any evidence that would vindicate the nation, it's almost found, identified, located, and destroyed, right? Mm-hmm. So when we found where her monograph was, I asked a friend of mine in the ministry who lived there, could he get it for me? And he was able to get it for me. And maybe about 6 months later, I went to speak in that city. And I was having just a conversation, because I wasn't there to talk on now, but I was having a conversation. And one of the brothers who was listening to the conversation, he said, I hear you mention Sarah Mitchell, you got a book from her. I said, yes. He said, you know, I think I know her. Mm. I think we grew up, my family grew up with her family. I'm like, really? Mm. She lives here? Wow. And so, to make the long story short, he was, you know, he facilitated the interview. And, you know, just a fascinating woman, even up in her older years. So it was a lot of things. This was a journey, Sister Andrina, and I certainly don't want to minimize and try to act like I know what childbirth is like. Let me qualify what I'm about to say. But this was really like delivering a baby. Pain and agony, and then a sigh of relief, because even after this was done, I did not know if the minister would approve it to be published. And we were finalizing this book as the minister was saying to everybody in the nation, I want y'all to stop talking about this subject. Right. Right. Like, so, but by Allah's grace and His mercy, what we offered met with His approval. And He even gave us, there's certain quotes in here that are directly from the minister. Particularly as we respond to Manic Marable, who I still can't figure out why he went and dug up Bruce Perry's already condemned research. But Bruce Perry was the person that tried to suggest that Malcolm had been in the closet. And so Marable picks this up and he includes it in this huge book. I mean, it's considered to be his life's work.
Right.
Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention. And so we had addressed it, and the minister, you know, he liked what we had to say, and he also added words about, because he knew Malcolm.
Right.
So, so it was a lot. Sister Andrea, it was a lot. My sister, your hand, what's up?
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you for coming back to us. And I definitely enjoyed, I have the book at home this morning, I opened it up. And my question was along the same lines, as it says, what part did you enjoy the most and what did you learn the most from the presentation?
Well, I said to the students yesterday that dealing with a lot of subjects, you have a certain degree of distance and separation from that subject that can make writing about that subject easier in some respects, because, you know, if I was, say for instance, if I was going to write about the Vietnam War, you know, I wasn't in the Vietnam War. Anybody that I knew was in the Vietnam War has probably passed on. I was never in the U.S. military. So you can be somewhat dispassionate about certain subjects that as a researcher and writer you want to take up. But this was a very, very sensitive subject.
Yes, sir.
And I'm reading and having to write about names and places of people I know,
Yes.
or those that I have access to, you know, or places I've been, people that I've met, you know, plus I'm in the nation, writing about the nation. I have a brother, Brother Mark, who's a professor in Georgia State. And he was talking to me one day about the emic versus the etic view. And he studies phenomenology. And he spends a lot of time studying organizations and social movements. And I forget which one it is, you could probably Google it. But one of them is the outsider's view.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if it's emic or etic. And the other one is the insider's view. And so I think what we were trying to do is kind of straddle the fence on that, because I was not trying to write just for an audience of the Nation of Islam.
Yes, sir.
But as a member of the Nation of Islam, I don't want to write in my own community don't approve of it either.
Right.
You know what I mean? You got to go home. You got to go home. So the mosque is my home. And I'm concerned that I represent my brothers and sisters to the best of my ability. That a community that have suffered misunderstanding, being misunderstood, been lied on, been slandered, been abused, been condemned and castigated, isolated, marginalized, that I and my work might bring honor to them.
Yes, sir.
That I might make them feel proud.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
So I couldn't just write, even with those sentiments, just write for us. And once it go out into the world's like, well, you know, it's just Nation of Islam propaganda.
Right. Right.
Be dismissed. And there may be people that still would feel that way. That's one of the reasons why many of us in the nation, we're more prone to use footnotes than endnotes. People in the academy know endnotes is the popular convention, but we got something to prove, Brother Mark.
Right, right.
So I want you to read what I say and look right at the bottom of the page. I don't want you to have to flip to the end of the chapter.
That's right.
I want you to see it right here. So there may be people that still feel that way. But I learned that when you're up close to a subject, it adds complexity to it.
Yes, sir.
Because again, I've done all of this work, and the minister could reject it. So, one day I had to tell y'all that story. Who has another question? Yes, ma'am, Sister Teal.
Something like that.
Well, excellent.
Question. Taking into consideration the movie and Alice Haley's book, what would you consider, with your research, the most damaging propaganda that was put out there, besides the nation involvement?
Really, both of those. I mean, you know how we say, Sister Tioka, every knock is a boost.
Right.
So, like, if you would go among the Muslims, and for those of you not familiar with that, just to be clarified, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and is also a part of the classical Islamic tradition. This is a parable of a donkey that fell in a ditch.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And people that walked by the donkey that fell in the ditch, you know, they just threw stones at the donkey. And at a certain point, they filled the ditch up with so many stones that the donkey was able to walk out of the ditch.
Right.
So every knock is a boost. But you can go among us, and there are many brothers and sisters in the nation that will point to Malcolm's autobiography.
Yes, sir.
Of leading them to the nation.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So there's certain things in it, you know, we talk about it in the book, Alex Haley and his relationship with the FBI.
Yeah.
Plus being something of a black conservative, you know. And then Malcolm died before the book is completed. Haley's left to finish it. So now it's in his hands. Betty Shabazz is in no position to read a final manuscript and approve it or not approve it and say, this is what my husband said. No, this ain't what my husband said. You know? So the book has problems. To Professor Marable's credit, he does a great job of identifying problems with the autobiography, right? And he even raises the question, should it even could be called an autobiography? Correct. You know, because was it, I mean, what's Malcolm, what's Haley?
Right.
It's hard to know when it's finalized after the main person is gone. He's off the scene. I would say the same thing for the movie. You know, I don't think Spike had malicious intent. I don't believe he did. I think that his errors were more or less carelessness and being a part of a generation that likes to kill sacred cows. There are those who don't like religion. And, you know, that's just a reality. Can't be too mad at a little bit of bad done in the name of religion.
That's right.
So I can understand a lot of folk that don't like religion. But it's a difference in not liking religion and waging a war against things that other folk hold as sacred. So I think Spike wasn't really concerned that, okay, this is, you know, the nation. And even if I don't believe what they believe, I have to respect that they believe it. And it's a deeply held religious belief. We were at the dinner table last night, Brother Jason and Sister Kadara, wonderful hosts as always. And you know, I raised a point that I think is worth raising now. And that point is that most of the time when the Nation of Islam is discussed or mentioned in the public, we are really robbed of what every other religious devotee and religious adherent is given as a right.
Yes, sir.
And that is that we assume that if you are Catholic or Buddhist or Jewish, that you arrived at that place of faith in that religion because you underwent an experience, a conversion experience is respected.
You don't have to agree with what that person believes, but in American society, we respect a conversion experience. You go to the high school where you know there's Susie. Oh, I didn't know she was a nun now.
Right,
When did she join the convent? You may disagree with you, say, man, they didn't let her in the convent, they let anybody up in there, right? That's your own opinion.
Right.
But you don't deny that at a certain point in her life, she encountered a word, an idea, a message that caused her to internally change, to become different on the inside.
yes, sir,
They robbed the Nation of Islam
yes, sir.
of that basic religious respect. When they introduced us to the public in a flood of propaganda in 1959,
Yes, sir.
they referred to us as the hate that hate produced. It's an outrageous claim. Because you know what it says? It says that there's no way that anybody could hear what Elijah Muhammad is saying and undergo a spiritual conversion.
Right, come on.
But I want you to know and understand that we underwent a transformation.
Yes, sir.
That's right.
Yes, at the message of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Yes, sir.
Something changed inside of us.
Yes, sir.
Hate didn't produce us.
Right,
Right.
Anti-Semitism did not produce us.
right.
We had an experience. And it caused us to be different. This ain't hate.
Beautiful.
This ain't just wanting to speak truth to power. It ain't just being stand-up brothers, courageous. We had an experience. But we are robbed of that basic respect because they want to perpetuate the notion that that's all that Elijah Muhammad and the Muslims have to say. But I'm here to tell you, we underwent an experience internally. So you may ask us, how did we come to the nation? We can tell you how we came. We can tell you maybe the day and the time, who was preaching, who was speaking, who invited us. But there are aspects of that we can't tell you. Because some of us went to our first meeting with our family members and our friends. They heard the same thing we heard.
Same thing. Exact same thing.
But unlike them, we stood up and stepped forward to say, I believe.
Yes, sir.
So that's a problem. You know, forgive me, because that's a soapbox issue of mine. And it has a companion problem, if you will. We kind of mentioned it somewhat yesterday with the students. And that is to only give the Honorable Elijah Muhammad credit for being able to reform people that came from a certain kind of life experience.
Right.
It's a backhanded compliment to call a man a social reformer who self-identifies as the messenger of God. You ain't doing him no favor. It's actually an attempt at reduction.
Right.
And to say that, you know, well, people that went to prison and people that was in gangs and people that was on Skid Row, people that was in dire straits, you know, those are the kind of folk that only could be the kind of folk that would follow Elijah Muhammad. But you know Principal Muhammad. You know Professor and School Board Member Muhammad.
Right.
You know Minister Ken Muhammad, Sister Muhammad. Yes, some of us came from the school of hard knowledge. But to act like Elijah Muhammad's message does not have any appeal to college students and business owners and professionals and entrepreneurs and athletes and clergymen. It's offensive to me. But I shouldn't be too surprised, Minister Martin. If you read the Holy Quran, you know that it was during the ministry of Noah that his critics say, oh, Noah, you can't be no messenger of God because only the meanest of the people follow you. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised that they say of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, only ex-cons and gangbangers and former drug users follow you, Elijah. I saw another hand. Yes, ma'am, Sister Colette. Walaikum salam.
I had a question. It's in your, and you might have addressed this already. I haven't had a chance to complete the book yet. Do you touch on anything that has to do with the verdict of the brothers that were originally tried for the murder of Malcolm X, and the brother that is now with us that was released? Is that in the book? Do you have a relationship with that brother? Have you done any research surrounding that?
We do address that in the book.
Okay.
I don't have a personal relationship with him, but I'm glad you raised that question because there are Johnny-come-latelys to this party that is celebrating the exoneration of Brother Muhammad Abdul Aziz and Khalil Islam. May Allah be pleased. They're Johnny-come-lately to their party. They now, I don't know if they've settled, but I know they were suing the state of New York to get millions of dollars for being falsely in prison. You had Netflix to do a documentary to highlight that. And it's like, this is a revelation now. But let me set the record straight.
Set it straight.
The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has always maintained innocence. Moreover, the minister got in trouble with Malcolmites and the mainstream media for back in the 1990s when Brother Muhammad Abdul Aziz rejoined the Nation of Islam. He appointed him as the East Coast Regional Captain and was crucified in the press for doing it. The Village Voice, the New York Post, the New York Times, the same brother that everybody is now celebrating, they falsely accused them brothers and put them in jail. And yeah, they should get that money. They should get everything that they are owed. Their families were destroyed. That was a very unpopular opinion in the 90s.
Yes, sir.
When the ministers invited brother back into his nation. And they gave him a position of honor and respect. No, so, we were talking to the students yesterday about history. And this is certainly an occasion where the value of history comes shining through. And when I talk about history, I'm not talking about ancient history.
Right.
This is modern history. But people forget modern history. People forget stuff that happened last year. So sometimes the study of history, we think, oh, I got to go and read about the Greco-Roman era. No, I mean, that's a study. But hey, for some of our children, just to go and study the 80s.
Oh.
80s, I grew up in the 80s. Now the 80s is history. These beautiful little children here, they don't know nothing about a landline telephone. Right. Dial-up internet. Right. Little children now show up in places asking for the Wi-Fi code. Right. 5 years old. Right. So, just recent history, is valuable and important to learn. Any other questions? Y'all been a very patient.
Yes, sir. If you don't mind.
Go right ahead. Yes, sir.
So one is, did you interview Brother Benjamin Kareem at all for the book? The assistant minister?
I didn't, but we have important excerpts from his book in this book. One of them was a very important point that I think he made, two important points I think he made, which was how he acknowledges that for all those who say, Malcolm made the nation, he points out, he said, the nation continued after Malcolm and made some of his greatest progress after him. He also, makes it, I think, an important point that Malcolm was not independently, I would say, the wise man that he manifested himself to be. So Benjamin Kareem makes it known, that Malcolm was a man who was expressing the wisdom of his teacher. And I have to say, just as a point of fact, to give credit where credit is due, don't never take nothing away from you.
That's right.
It ain't taking nothing away, because I know people that really love Malcolm. I was in my 7th seat in Brooklyn on a Friday night a few years ago, talking about this subject. And I think you would admit or would agree that I'm not up here castigating Brother Malcolm or speaking ill of Brother Malcolm, but just the things that I was saying, a sister stood up in the audience with tears in her eyes. She was upset. She loved Malcolm, and she felt like that even what we were saying, it was against Malcolm, And so, we responded to her, and she decided to continue to stay. And by Allah's grace, I believe we were able to win her over, because at the end of the meeting, she was very happy, and she said she was coming back. But I say that because I'm reminded of those who really deeply love Brother Malcolm. And sometimes they want to love him and exclude the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Right. I'm not a psychologist, but I think that's kind of like what they define as cognitive dissonance. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Because you can't admire him fully, honestly, to the exclusion of his teaching. Right. Because remove Elijah Muhammad from Malcolm's life, and you just have a young man in prison struggling to find his way. But Malcolm deserves a lot of credit. When I was talking with Student Minister Abdul Salam, who will be here next Sunday in Rochester, who is our archivist and an imam in the nation. And he reminded me, he said, by and large, our style of ministry or teaching the word goes back to Malcolm. Because Malcolm taught the ministry. Right. Malcolm was the one who, when he came into the nation, he had to take a pause and look at the scene, check the scene. Right. Many of the ministers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad at that time were much older men. Yes, sir. Sure. Yes, sir. And their style of delivery and representation of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's teachings was in a slower cadence, in an older style from their generation. So Malcolm is a young man becoming excited about what he was learning from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And his youthful enthusiasm becomes the filter for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's message. So that's the day-to-day example that Minister Farrakhan comes up under. So the certain call and response, I heard it when I was listening to Minister Kenneth. In fact, I heard Minister Kenneth go. I See, I hope Brother Mr. Kenneth don't preach the whole lecture. I was getting excited though. But that's our style of delivery. What have to give Malcolm a lot of credit for that.
Correct.
When Malcolm was Malcolm,
Yes.
the Honorable Elijah Muhammad didn't have a better minister.
That's right.
So we don't have to, it ain't gotta be either or. It's and both.
Yes.
And that's why the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is so important, because from a place of love, you are able to see the value in everybody.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
Minister Willie Muhammad, who's the minister in New Orleans, shared with me that the minister said, and this just shows you know how the minister is. He said, brother, when you're dealing with people, he said, find an atom's weight of good and feed it. Think over that now.
Go ahead.
An atom's weight of good. There's a lot of us be ready to throw one another away
Right.
for no reason at all. But the minister said, find an atom's weight of good and feed it. This man Farrakhan is not who you think he is.
Right.
Because if he was, he just would not have survived.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
He wouldn't have survived.
Right.
He's guided by love and spiritual principles. And I say that having watched him from afar, and I say it from having worked directly with him for the past 13 years. The minister is a deeply spiritual man. And that's why we can say we are students in his ministry class,
Yes, sir.
but it's difficult to say you represent him, because to represent him means that you and I operate from that same place of love, and that is admittedly difficult. It's difficult to walk the spiritual path, because you do have to turn the other cheek sometimes. You do have to be willing to be rebuked and scorned so that you might redeem one. I've seen the minister demonstrate that. Oh, he sets the bar very high for anyone that wants to represent that kind of teaching. Any other questions? And then he got food back there.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
This answer is speculation, but Manny Merrill didn't see his book published.
It's true.
He died beforehand. It's true. So do you think it was the actual book
that he wanted to put out? You know, I thought about that, Minister Mark. I don't know. But I'd like to think at this point, because he had a team of researchers, I'd like to think that if there were substantive differences between what the publishers put out and what the professor had intended to be put out, I would like to think his team would have said, you know what, this book contains errors that we know Professor Marable never intended to be included. Yes, sir. But I don't think any of them have stepped forward to speak against what was published. So, you know, it's a good question.
It's a beautiful answer.
It's a good question. Man devote his life to a project and gets it to the finish line.
Done.
I mean, it's something to be said for just the fact that, man, I've got this out, my health ought to come back a little bit, you know what I mean? If I ain't doing nothing but surviving on adrenaline, right? Because I've got out my life's work, you know? But I don't know, you know, I'm not a doctor, but I'm just you know,
And every time I see an interview, sharp-witted and just amazing. But she comes to mind because she talked about writing for the white gaze, meaning that in American society, whatever creative product that
the Black community into a mainstream space has to be looked upon by the ruling class of whites in America. And so to what degree does the white gaze affect the creative process coming from the Black community that has been, you know, the underclass, as the scriptures say, the despised and the rejected. And so she caught a lot of pushback because she refused to submit that the white gaze would cause her to modify her content. In scholarship, that's a problem. She was doing literature, but it's a problem in scholarship, believe it or not. It's a problem in the academy, believe it or not. So it's hard to say what the good professor, you know, really intended or what he didn't intend. All we can deal with is what's out there. Is that the time? I'm so thankful, and I certainly want to just extend my appreciation to Monroe High School, Principal Muhammad Garner, and all of those students yesterday for hosting us and for being so encouraging of what we are attempting to do. Really do appreciate it. And I hope that you feel that it was time well spent.
Yes, sir.
And I would certainly be very interested if there are any reactions from yourself, from the students in the days to come. If they thought that they learned some things, or you know, if they thought that there was anything that could have been done better. You know, the Japanese have a philosophy called Kaizen, which means continuous improvement. And so I take whatever constructive critique that you would have for me with me as we move on down the road to the next destination, so that we might become better at what we do and continue to improve. But just feel with profound gratitude and thanks for each and every one of you coming out to be with us today. Certainly encourage you, if you want to learn more about the nation, and get with Student Minister Kenneth or Principal Muhammad. They do a great job of representing the nation in this city. I was on the phone with Brother Student Minister Courtney talking with Student Minister Halim in Phoenix. And I was telling him that I would be in his neck of the woods because he had purchased some of the Ramadan Journal for Phoenix. And I said, you know, I'm gonna be in Rochester. He's from Buffalo. And he said, well, you know, brother, as much as I love Buffalo, I think Rochester is where it's at these days.
Wow, go ahead.
So
That's right.
Rochester has emerged as a very strong community of believers.
Yes, sir.
And I'm always, again, happy to be here because I see what I believe to be the minister represented very well, because I see the Muslims here as not just Muslims trying to make up the mosque, but as community stakeholders.
Right.
Involved in what's taking place in our communities.
Good observation.
And the minister encourages that. He gives to us principles of truth that if we live there, we find ourselves comfortable in any setting of righteous folk, regardless of race, class, creed, or color. And so I feel very positive about the Rochester Mosque and Steady Repair, because we have our Islam not just tucked away inside a small building, but it's on display so people can see. I don't know nothing about Muslim and Bible, Quran, but I know Brother Marcus. I know Brother Kenneth. I know Principal Muhammad. I know Brother Courtney. I can't split hairs over is it Jesus the right way, or Muhammad the right way, or Allah or God, but those are good people. Those are honest people. Those are conscientious people. Those are people who are interested in making our cities and our neighborhoods safe and decent places to live. So I salute you, right, to keep great.
Beautiful. Thank you, brother. Thank you. Even though we had technical difficulties, it didn't stop the train. Is that right?
That's right.
So at this time, we thank you all for coming. We have food in the back. It is free and open for you to enjoy. The bean pie's got a tag on it. That's different. We also have Brother Demetric's books here. If you would like to meet and greet brother and perhaps look at his books, you can definitely do so. Thank you again, Ms. Garver, for being the catalyst of the motivation to achieve. And we thank you all and have a wonderful day. If you are in the Rock tomorrow, Brother Minister Demetric Muhammad will be delivering a powerful word tomorrow at 11 a.m. You're all invited.